Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Metahumanism pod, my podcast on philosophy at the intersection of metahumanism, metamodernism, and postcolonialism, or if we're very strictly defining it, decolonialism. But that's a matter for another episode, actually. So I just returned from a wonderful a road trip to South Dakota. It's wonderful in many ways, pretty intense, a lot of driving. From Philadelphia to South Dakota was about 1,800 miles. I'm just rounding off, and back slightly more because I went a different route through Kansas City and Louisville, visiting some friends. But I've just the South Dakota, the Black Hills, the culture, the Sioux Nation culture, the Lakota is another name. Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota, three branches of the Sioux Nation. Their culture, their history, their cosmology, and just the national parks, Badlands, Wind Cave, their local parks with local animals, fauna, the bison, the all various animals like burros related to horses and so on. So just all around wonderful trip. I've enriched. I feel enriched culturally and emotionally and spiritually, and so renewed my energy to continue working on this channel and all the other projects I'm involved with. So with that brief introduction, and to catch you up, why I've been kind of missing in the action last week. Now I want to continue from where I left off last time. In my last episode, I compared Skovoroda, Kotlяревский, who was considered widely to be a founder of modern Ukrainian literature, and Thomas Jefferson, just comparing their lives, their ideas, or their roles, because all of them lived roughly during the same period in the 18th century. Skovoroda slightly prior to both Jefferson and Kotlяревский. Earlier generation, so he was born in 1722, just to recollect, and both Jefferson and Kotlяревский were born slightly in the middle of 18th century. So but roughly the same historical period. The Enlightenment ideas, clearly Thomas Jefferson is one of the spokesmen for the American Enlightenment and founding the United States. He embodied those ideas politically, and then Kotlяревский was in some ways also embodied those ideas, but in a different context, and he directed those ideas into more cultural pursuits, theater, writing, epic poetry, or dramas. So that's what he's known for. And then Skovoroda, he created this philosophical synthesis, and actually not very heavily influenced by the Enlightenment rationalism, and that's what I want to conclude this kind of investigation into Skovoroda's philosophy and how its genealogy, in a way where it was synthesized Neoplatonism, Stoicism, Orthodoxy tradition, contemplative tradition within Orthodoxy called Hesychasm. And so he created this secular philosophical synthesis. He's often, Skovoroda is seen as the figure from the Baroque. So his style, his allegories, style of writing is more characteristic of the Baroque culture and period than the Enlightenment rationalism but in many ways. But he lived during those times, and he certainly was aware of everything that was happening in the world. And as I said, the Enlightenment wasn't as dominant in Ukrainian culture because it was associated immediately with the in the Russian imperial court. The Catherine, Peter the First and Catherine the Second, both kind of pretended to be enlightened despots or tried to reform the empire. They created the empire and tried to build it. And what they did is they basically enslaved Ukrainians into the serfdom. They destroyed the Cossack autonomy. So obviously for Ukrainians, the Enlightenment could not be seen as something good or progressive, just by the virtue of being connected to the Russian imperial colonization and oppression. So that's just that perspective. And so immediately for Ukrainians, the Enlightenment immediately was seen as something with a shadow, with an underside, which is darker than the name Enlightenment makes it seem. For the rest of the world that wasn't as exposed to this kind of hypocrisy, you could say, it took much longer to realize the whole 19th century and into the 20th century to fully realize the consequences of where this Enlightenment rationalism, this too optimistic faith in progress, and that ignores the underside, the shadow of that human reason, where it can lead. And this is often repeated that World War I and II, the outcomes of imperialism, and then the rise of fascism in the world. That's sort of the underside, the industrial mass murder, the communism, Soviet communism specifically. And even Chinese communism. Also, many people, industrialization, all of that, the destruction of nature through industrialization. So all of those processes are already kind of they could have been. And probably if you I'm making this claim, I'm sure that some people saw this the what it would lead to even as early as 18th century. Just their warnings may not have been heeded, or because there was just not too much optimism, too much faith in this human reason, and too much just one-sided perspective, not realizing. I guess not enough knowledge was accumulated at that time about the unconscious drives, about how human psyche works, and this was not understood well enough, unfortunately, in how in the same terms it is understood today, anyway. So, although human nature in some ways hasn't changed that much, and that humans have been aware of what evil that can happen, and what people are, of war, of disease, and other things that can happen in the world, the catastrophes. But this faith and reason kind of really lost this connection and understanding. I think certain amount of wisdom by this exceptional or excessive faith in reason, and ignoring the darker sides of human nature. So with that introduction, so the final chapter of this kind of investigation of Skovoroda's philosophy, at least for the time being, I will return to Skovoroda again, but for now I want to finish it with comparing his philosophy with the European Enlightenment and with American Enlightenment. So three points of comparison, and just to draw out the distinction in philosophical terms, specifically. Just focusing on in philosophical terms on different aspects of that perspective. European Enlightenment, then Jeffersonianism or American Enlightenment, that's just the most prominent example, and then Skovoroda's philosophy, and just to compare them side by side and see the slightly different emphases and what they can maybe these two different I wouldn't three different, but obviously two Enlightenment perspectives on one side, and Skovoroda is sort of I'm juxtaposing him as something slightly different. So how these two perspectives, the Enlightenment and Skovoroda, how they can inform each other, and how we can adapt both of them and then use it going forward in some in better ways than they have been in the past. Learning from the historical lessons from the tragedies that happened through history. So let's begin with ontology and epistemology. First and foremost, and first the dimension is view of reality. So for European Enlightenment, and you can think of figures like this is preceding the Enlightenment, Descartes and Newton. They laid the groundwork that eventually led, the scientific revolution, the Renaissance. Even you can even reach back to the humanism of Renaissance. But ultimately, the Enlightenment came out was built on those foundations, and figures like Voltaire, David Hume, also they are the ones who lived in the 18th century and represent the Enlightenment thinking. One is Scottish, obviously. The other, Voltaire, is French. So there's many other figures, but those you could use those to orient you. So they typically their world view of reality was represented either by monistic materialism or mechanistic dualism. So monistic materialism meaning that everything is composed of matter, and so spiritual side is denied completely, or the material side is fundamental, is seen as the only underlying principle for all reality. And then mechanistic dualism is that's more of Descartes, cogito ergo sum, mind and body are separate substances and function in different ways, and body is kind of an obstacle for mind, or in a way. So that's what and the body works as a mechanism. It's just a machine. Or the universe itself is a machine. It works according to mechanistic principles. So that worldview was characteristic. The world was basically understood through reason and empirical observation. It's a fairly commonplace even today. Empirical science and the scientific process, scientific method. There's much to be said about it, but it has its limits, and they have been recognized, but not by everyone yet. Even today, still too many people have this overly optimistic view of science and technology and so on, and they don't realize the limits or the dangers, despite all the historical lessons we have access to these days. Okay, so next is Jeffersonianism or American Enlightenment, and their worldview was slightly different, more tempered than European. So it can be characterized as naturalistic theism, or deism is another way of saying it, as it's well known. Many American founders believed in deism, which is that world was created by God, but God does not interfere with the world in any way. He was just this rational creator, and now that the world has been created, it functions on its own, and God doesn't, the creator doesn't really interfere with the working of the world. So still pretty important emphasis on reason and rationality, but slightly less maybe stringent and anti-clerical or anti-religious than some of the European Enlightenment figures such as Voltaire, and David Hume was also very critical of religion. And then now we have Skovoroda, which in the previous episodes I already mentioned a lot of about his worldview, but just to encapsulate it, his was a dual world symbolic ontology. So he saw the world as being, so there's a visible world which we all experience, then there's invisible divine reality, and then there's this symbolic dimension that mediates between the two. and so the world is seen for him as a parable to read. So to the symbols is how you access that hidden spiritual reality, which is more, in some sense, more accurate or truer than the phenomenal world. So these ideas are not unique. You can see some echoes of even like Plato or Kant, or some of the same possible ideas. And Neoplatonism was influential on Skovoroda. But it's not a dualism. So these two worlds are not separate from each other. They're just two sides of the same reality in a way for Skovoroda. So visible and invisible, they coexist simultaneously, and to be able to read the invisible in the visible, you need the symbolic mediation, and that's why the parable and the allegorical language is so important, and that was his approach. In terms of source of knowledge, so now on to epistemology. For European Enlightenment, it was reason and scientific inquiry. So skepticism toward tradition and mysticism, emphasis on rationality, reasoning, and above all, basically, that's a quick summary. For American Enlightenment, Jeffersonianism, reason plus common sense, so more practical oriented, and empirical observation, belief in educated citizens, capacity to grasp truth. So consonant with the European Enlightenment, it's just maybe slightly different emphases, because of the different political environments, socio-political realities, slightly different cultural emphases, but along the same lines as the mainstream European Enlightenment. And for Skovoroda, the source of knowledge was inner heart knowing. So serce in Ukrainian, the heart. So really, you know yourself through your heart, and the allegorical interpretation of nature and scripture. That was his method as well. So that's how he envisioned accessing truth and knowledge through those methods and practices. As far as truth goes, the European Enlightenment viewed truth as objective, universal, and discoverable by rational means, either by scientific, method or reasoned inquiry, according to specifically defined rules of deduction, induction, so on, logic. And for Jeffersonianism, also truth is self-evident, accessible through reason and experience, so very similar. And for Skovoroda, he saw truth as something more hidden, more symbolic, more esoteric, not as readily available, not as easily accessible as all that, must be uncovered through personal transformation. So he emphasized a different emphasis, as you can tell. He didn't exclude reason in any way. Skovoroda obviously was highly educated. He also schooled in rhetoric and logic and so on. But his personal philosophy was focused. He didn't see that as sufficient to gain access to truth. He saw that reason is helpful, but it's not the end all and be all. Okay, so in summary, in this first category of ontology epistemology, Skovoroda's esoteric realism insists that truth is hidden and must be spiritually discerned, right? It's not just by reason that you access through rational, explicit inquiry. It has to, sometimes you take it through your heart, you perceive, or you access truth by personal transformation, by experience that may not be easily or readily discursive or explainable logically or rationally, right? So he decenters cognition in favor of noesis, and you can go back to previous episodes on noetics within the epistemological theory, if you want to remind yourself, or if you haven't watched it yet, what noesis. Basically, it's about intellect. Noesis the tradition of intellectual intuition. So he emphasized that perspective, and not as much just strictly cognition, rational, reasonable cognition that in the Enlightenment emphasized. So he was closer to mystical traditions like Jakob Böhme in the European context, or Meister Eckhart, German, some of the German mystics, than to Locke and Hume, for example, in his philosophy. So next category of or the aspect of philosophy is anthropology, or the human condition, how they theorized different thinkers. First aspect of this is human nature, how they viewed human nature. So in European Enlightenment, the mainstream tradition, it was the ideal, or the how they viewed people as a rational individual, as rational individuals. That are autonomous subject. Each person is an autonomous subject defined by reason and progress. Okay, the most straightforward way to put it. Jeffersonianism, for his ideal, was the citizen farmer, again, self-reliant, rational, morally capable of self-rule, self-governance in a way. So the whole idea of independence, not being interfered with, the faith that a self-reliant, rational individual can take care of his own affairs. That was the vision of Jeffersonian democracy. Skovoroda he viewed people as created in the image of God, with a divine kernel inside, in the heart. So inner freedom is the essence for him, of each person. And so the whole project is about finding out that inner essence, or inner divine nature, and living according to it. And each person has to seek that for themselves. There is no universal answer or universal aspect. Each person has to find his or her own inner nature and live according to it. Now, in terms of freedom, European Enlightenment approached it as a political and intellectual liberty, freedom from superstition, freedom from monarchy, freedom from tradition. And in some aspects, one could say it was taken to extremes. These excessive skepticism, excessive criticism of religion and spirituality, even. Excessive emphasis on rationality, and this was embodied in the French Revolution, the excesses of French Revolution, the terror, the dictatorship of Robespierre, then the Napoleon afterwards usurping power. So that kind of followed out from this excessive faith in reason and ability to control and master the nature. So Jeffersonianism, similar perspective, political liberty, obviously very important, civic republicanism. So this is was also kind of contra monarchy, obviously, the American Revolution, establishing a republic. Freedom as self-governance, again, this is the ideal, Jeffersonian ideal, rooted in land and community. And for Skovoroda, this inner freedom, it was more focused on inner freedom from passion, from vanity, from institutional control, freedom of the heart. So some similarities in terms of how they viewed freedom, but because of the circumstances in which Skovoroda lived, as I described, within the empire, the oppressive empire, obviously he could not associate freedom with the external political system he was living in, as Jefferson could, because he helped build that system based on his values and principles. The new system, I mean, the United States, the new republic. Education. So the last aspect of this in this category of anthropology, education, enlightenment through knowledge. So that's the mainstream approach within the enlightenment. You gain elevate yourself and educate yourself via science, knowledge, pursuit of knowledge, universal education to cultivate reason. Again, rationality and reason were emphasized the most. For Jeffersonians, similarly, public education to help foster civic virtue. So again, emphasis on republicanism, literacy, democratic self-rule. So these were connected. And for Skovoroda, self-knowledge, wisdom as spiritual transformation. Again, less emphasis on institutional aspect because of the circumstances, but similar ideals in some ways. Self-knowledge, value for knowledge as such, pursuit of knowledge, but more emphasis on spiritual dimension, spiritual transformation, experiential knowledge, not just science or scientific pursuit, but also inner knowledge. So to sum up this anthropological aspect, for Skovoroda, true freedom is inner liberation from ego and vanity, not political emancipation necessarily, not just political emancipation. To him, political emancipation is not sufficient to be truly free. If you're a slave to your passions, for example, a slave to your ego, that's not freedom. If he went deeper, he pursued true spiritual and moral freedom, and he critiques external freedom without inner transformation as illusionary. Next aspect is ethics and politics. First, let's look at the ethics. European Enlightenment for ethics was seen as rational, based in reason, universal moral law. Kant is an example of a categorical imperative. If you do what you want others to do, or follow a certain rule that doesn't, let's say, use humans as a means only, but also as the ends. There are different formulations, and obviously there is a lot more to his philosophy, but those are some of the examples. And utilitarian ethics also came out of this, the kind of also rational calculus. How do you calculate greater happiness of the greatest number? That's utilitarian approach. Kantian is more deontological, where it's duty. And I will probably record a series on ethics at some point, just as I did on epistemology, and discuss these terms and ideas in greater depth. But that's basically both utilitarian and deontological traditions are rooted in Enlightenment, in rational approach. Jeffersonianism, very similar, ethics rooted in natural rights, or also reason was important. Pursuit of happiness and virtue is the goal. Life, liberty, and happiness, and pursuit of happiness, as he changed the. Locke's formulation was life, liberty, and pursuit of property, just so in case you weren't aware in the original, and then Jefferson just changed it to pursuit of happiness when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Next, Skovoroda. So his perspective was his ethics was based in living according to his inner nature, divine nature in some sense. So srodnost, which I discussed in previous episodes. So kind of an affinity or vocation or something that calling, from within. Harmony with God and the world. That's the ideal for him in terms of ethical living. As far as politics, European Enlightenment, again, believe in rational governance, everything kind of that can be calculated, reasoned, explicitly, discursively, progress, reform. Progressive politics, reformist politics, even revolutionary to an extent. critique of tyranny. Voltaire is a famous. He said, may not agree with you, but I will defend to death your right to have your own opinion," and things like that. So there's certainly Enlightenment deserves its name. It's just that there's also certain limits and excesses which were ignored initially. In terms of Jeffersonianism, politics, democratic republicanism, as I said, the citizen farmer kind of limited government, individual rights, public virtue. We're all pretty much familiar in America, and I think the world, familiar with this vision and its limitations ultimately in the end. And the Skovoroda, he avoided politics, which I described because of the circumstances, the imperialism, the oppression, the enslavement. Obviously, politics for him was a site of excess, hypocrisy, demoralization, and cynicism, and so on. And so he avoided politics purposefully. He saw power as corrupt and distracting from the spiritual path of personal transformation. And role of the state. The last aspect of this category is that European Enlightenment saw the enlightened state as promoter of liberty and rational order. That's the role of the state. For Jeffersonianism, similar, but state is as a servant of the as the servant of the people, protector of rights, promoter of education. And for Skovoroda, he didn't see much role for the state in his philosophy, minimal or none, really. That's why you could say he was an anarchist in some sense. The soul should not rely on external structures. So for him, focus was solely on inner transformation, on your inner freedom, and external structures just didn't interest him much. So his philosophy was focused on the inner development. So he was, you could say Skovoroda was anti-political in a classical cynic or a Christian sense, that inner reality or spirituality is more important to focus on for everybody than obsess about external structures, which may and often are unjust and problematic and full of corruption and this and that, and not that you should abandon maybe hope to change things, but it should start for Skovoroda. The emphasis went, you start with yourself, knowing yourself, and living ethically according to your own values. It's just in ancient Greece, cynical, that's what the cynicism, like Diogenes, who lived kind of didn't participate and lived in a barrel. That's an extreme example of that kind of approach to life. And Skovoroda, he was a mendicant philosopher. He didn't live in one place. He traveled from place to place, living in various with his friends and conversing with all kinds of people. So itinerant life, not settled anywhere, and not refusing to build a career in imperial or church structures. So Jefferson saw political transformation as a moral necessity, and it's understandable in that context, but Skovoroda saw politics as a distraction and as a corruption from true spiritual transformation. So now next is religion and spirituality, so for European Enlightenment, religion was seen as often nothing but superstition or natural theology. So it's something that naturally emerges out of the society, but is not justified. And often Enlightenment figures were either deist or anti-clerical. Deist is example would be Jefferson is an example of it. There were also European deists. Voltaire, Voltaire was actually even more extreme. He was anti-clerical, but others were more, kind of more moderate. But so they would may still believe in God, but they didn't think that God had any role to play in day-to-day life. And that was Jefferson's also reinterpretation of Christianity. His Bible was excluded miracles, focused on ethics. So in fundamentalist terms, it's not quite Christianity. So depending who you ask, more traditional approaches to Christianity is not may see deism as already a compromise of but that was the very popular point of view at that time. And Skovoroda, as I said in the previous, he was deeply spiritual, obviously grounded in Christian orthodoxy and the contemplative tradition, but he didn't. He also rebelled against the hypocrisies and the corruption within the church and the empire. So he was non-dogmatic, and he synthesized, as I went through his philosophy in a few. In the recent episodes, he synthesized ancient Greek ideas with orthodoxy in a new way, and so he emphasized this inner church of the heart, one might say. So he was not interested in the institutional, external, dogmatic instructions. He was more interested on seeking the truth and God within one's heart, inner nature, inner freedom. Very mystical, very contemplative, very inner oriented and ethically oriented, and so in many ways it's a rebellious attitude and vision, although quietly rebellious in a sense. So in terms of again, I kind of already touched upon this, but clergy institutions. For European Enlightenment, there was a deep distrust of ecclesiastical power, and I mentioned Voltaire. He championed. He wanted to promote religious tolerance, meaning non-dogmatism, and allowing for everybody to have the freedom of conscience. And obviously, that also became important for the foundation of the United States through Jefferson's ideas. The freedom of religion, separation of church and state, freedom of conscience, enshrined in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. So, and that's one of the greatest things about the Constitution. And then for Skovoroda, also in this he was also sharply critical of formal church. And called for personal divine connection, so the mystical connection between one's inner world, heart, and God. So inside one's soul or one's spiritual being. Let's put it that way. So what was the sacred for Enlightenment, mainstream European Enlightenment? Actually, they often these thinkers went as far as to deny anything sacred, meaning that there's just nothing sacred in the world. The world is desacralized. It's more naturalized, sacred reduced to just moral order or reason or based in reason. So looking for natural side of everything, tying everything to nature. And in Jeffersonianism, this was also the case, maybe not as excessive as in some other instances, but also sacred was tied to natural rights. And in Europe also, this idea of natural law, natural rights, it came out of this tradition. Nature's God, moral law, kind of trying to build from nature, starting from natural causes and not some theological or dogmatic causes. Natural religion, there are a lot of Hume wrote about the dialogues about natural religion and so on. Actually excellent text, very, very good text, very thought-provoking. I recommend it to anybody. His writings on religion, dialogues, and then the natural history of religion. Both you can get both of them together in one book. And then Skovoroda, finally, for him, the sacred was immanent. Again, in the heart, in every person and thing contains hidden divine meaning. So there is a kernel of divinity within everything. and it just needs to be discovered and accessed and known. And that was the whole point of his philosophy, is to achieve that personal transformation, to learn your own inner divine spark, so to speak, which is immanent in each person. So the distinction here, that Enlightenment thinkers, they want to tame or remove the sacred from the world or from life in some ways, or minimize it. Jefferson wanted to rationalize it, make it kind of grounded in reason and in reason. There is no other way to say it. And Skovoroda sought to rediscover this hidden presence in all things. So a little bit more mystical and a more symbolic approach, as I already mentioned. He proposed, so for Skovoroda, he proposed this post-ecclesial sacrality. So because he wasn't focused on institutions, for him the sacred was not engendered in the institutions or the external trappings of religion, but inside your heart, in your spirituality. In your values, in how you live and how you think of yourself, how well you know yourself, your own mind, your own heart. And so it was not dogmatic, but neither was it dismissive of religion. So, and this is why part of the reason why I think Skovoroda's ideas are very relevant to our moment, historical moment today, as the world is really moving kind of, you could say, post-secular, post-critical direction. We're, metamodernism, metahumanism, we're trying to move beyond the limitations of the past, the limitations of humanism, limitations of modernism. Postmodernism and posthumanism criticize these aspects of human culture and history, and that's all well and good. Though that those criticisms do have a lot of truth and value in them, but we have to move forward and go beyond beyond humanism, beyond modernism, and propose a new version of. We can keep those good aspects of it, but address the shadow aspects of those systems of thought or cultural phenomena, because we can't ignore them. If we ignore them, then they will. If we repress them, to use Freudian terms, if you repress, the repressed will always return in a worse shape, in a worse form, and affect our lives, just like the 20th century has shown us what humanity is able to do if it loses its way. So we can't let that happen again. But we're not. There's no guarantee that it might not. So, and we're kind of living through a moment when it may seem sometimes people are confused, they're not sure what to do with the AI developing, with the World War III on everybody's tongues, talking about this war in Ukraine, war in Israel, war in Gaza, China eyeing Taiwan, this, that, Iran, North Korea, conflagrations, and the U.S. is not really doing well domestically either right now. So there's all these interplay of these factors, and it's a lot of uncertainty where the world is going and what path lies ahead. And so I think that this Skovoroda's perspective is extremely valuable and relevant these days. Obviously, it needs to be adapted and adjusted, and it must enter into dialogue with more contemporary perspectives, and that's what this channel really is ultimately about for me, exploring metahumanism. And this is why in one of the previous episodes I argued that Skovoroda is really a proto-metahumanist and proto-metamodernist thinker in some sense. He definitely was a decolonial thinker. He was against the empire, and he gave an example of how he can resist without violence, without any kind of it was kind of quiet resistance, but rebellious nonetheless. Spirituality It's not to say that that's the only way you can resist. There's also obviously the wars going on right now in Ukraine, and the resistance, armed resistance, is also important in such situations. But spirituality is and morality and all these considerations are no less important. And in other situations where there is no war, at least openly or kinetic war, there is still a war of values, a war of for your mind. Sometimes they say there's a war going on for your mind, meaning each person's what does each person believe, what values do they prioritize, and this matters because if somebody chooses hedonistic materialist values and neglects spirituality, morality, and just pursues power and wealth for its own sake as a value in its own money, that defines a certain way of living, and it affects and if enough people do it, it causes certain social effects and consequences, and some of them we can witness pretty they're pretty obvious. We can observe them in America, in Europe, in other countries as well. Via cultural imperialisms, these kind of perspectives get even in China. There's as prosperity grows, and there's certain amount of kind of overemphasis on the material aspect of life and the neglect of the spiritual or moral aspect, and within that system, which is a dictatorial system, one-party dictatorship, obviously there's already a setup that's not very conducive to freedom. So all these considerations are important. That's why I've spent so much time on Skovoroda and explaining his philosophy and the roots of his philosophy and how he is relevant. And I will continue returning to him in the future episodes in some ways. But this, for the time being, I think this will be the last episode expressly focused on Skovoroda. Just to sum up today's episode, basically you could say what makes Skovoroda kind of radically different is that Enlightenment gave us this ideal of rational subjects, and this is still visible or still detectable in the way how we think of things within economics. The whole idea of homo economicus, being irrationally deciding about what to purchase and so on, that for the longest time that's been the assumption in economics, that human beings make decisions rationally. Well, now behavioral economics, evolutionary economics are adjusting and recognizing that was a silly assumption to make, that was a wrong assumption to make, because a lot of people make decisions completely irrationally or even not consciously. It's based on biases, on their unconscious assumptions, and it's not. We don't make decisions just by using our rational minds, conscious and discursive minds. No, that's not how our minds work at all, and a lot of it happens underneath the conscious level. So that's, and it's important to understand, and we are beginning to understand it, only beginning, just the very beginnings. The Jeffersonianism gave us civic individual, so civic republican ideal. America is well known. That was one of the greatest contributions, this freedom of civic republicanism. Democracy in America, written by oh my God, I mean, it's very famous text. The French thinker and politician also. He was part of de Tocqueville, yes. So he wrote Democracy in America about the associations, the civic republicanism, this culture of democracy, very important, but we see it's under assault in these days. But that was the ideal kind of democratic harmony with liberty and nature. That was Jeffersonianism. And then Skovoroda, you could say, gave us a pilgrim of the heart that seeks neither power nor revolution, but a life in accordance with one's divine nature. Okay, so not saying that one of these is more better than the other, but I'm saying that Skovoroda has something to teach us, and his teachings are relevant for today's world, and one could, maybe combining, for example, Jeffersonian ideal, Skovoroda's ideal, some other contemporary perspectives, which I will explore in future episodes on this channel. But for the time being, I will let Skovoroda rest. And because there's so much more to talk about, and actually during my road trip, there are a few ideas that started percolating in my mind about what direction to take. So I haven't decided as of yet, but something new will be coming next week, a different direction. And it remains to be seen what direction that will be, but I will try to make it interesting as always. So thank you very much for being with me, for listening to my podcasts, and as always, please support Ukraine if you aren't supporting Ukraine yet. Hopefully this war will end soon enough, in a good way for Ukraine. Russia must be punished. Russian imperialism must be stopped. They will not stop on their own. So this is just the reality we're dealing with. It has to be, Russia has to be dealt with in a way that will prevent future aggression. And the only way to do it is to impose certain conditions on it and make it realize that the world is ready to oppose their aggression and their evil. Otherwise, there will never be peace in the world. So please support Ukraine in any way you can. Please support my content, like, share, comment, and if you can financially, that's always, I would be grateful for that as well, to support my efforts in some ways. And I will see you next time. Thank you.